It's the TMZ Behind the Bar podcast with the TMZ lawyers, Jason Beckerman and Derek Kaufman.
I don't believe I've ever had French champagne before.
Oh, actually, all champagne is French. It's named after the region. Otherwise, it's sparkling white wine. Americans, of course, don't recognize the convention, so it becomes that thing of calling all of their sparkling whites champagne, even though by definition they're not.
Yes. It's a lot like Star Trek, The Next Generation. In many ways, it's superior, but will never be as recognized as the original.
I love that scene. Jason.
I love it. So that was obviously Rob Lowe playing Benjamin Cain in Wayne's World, trying to impress the beautiful Tia Carrera.
The Dreamweaver, man.
That's right.
That movie brings me back.
By flaunting his knowledge of champagne. All right. So welcome, everyone, to another episode of TMZ's Behind the Bar. I'm Jason Beckerman.
And I'm Derek Kaufman.
It's actually our 10th episode, and we wanted to celebrate by taking you behind the actual bar.
That's right. This episode's all about liquor, Jason.
I love it. I think it's probably become pretty well known by now that Champagne describes a very specific area of France, the Champagne region of France, and Champagne, the drink, only applies to sparkling wine that is made in Champagne, France.
That's it. If you're drinking it in the U.S., it's sparkling white wine. If you go to Spain, you get some cava. If you go to Italy, you get some prosecco. They're all roughly the same thing. It's white wine with bubbles, but
to be called champagne,
it's
got to be in Champagne.
That's it. If you're Moet, it is champagne.
Right. But this is just the tip of the vine. These crazy labeling conventions are applicable to whiskey and gin and vodka and tequila and just about every other liquor that you can imagine. I was stunned when we started looking into the background for this podcast of the state and federal and really international regulations that govern the labeling of different alcohols. There's a whole section in the 1993 International Intellectual Property Rights Accord that talks about liquor, the 2006 International Agreement on the Trade of Wine. I mean, just think about the amount of time it took for politicians to sit around at like The Hague or wherever it is and discuss these things with the UN and discuss these agreements.
These are elected officials that are poring over large pieces of legislation about just liquor.
That's
Pretty incredible to me.
Multi-billion-dollar industry, obviously. But, I was surprised by how much regulation there was, but I was not nearly as stunned to find that since these laws have been passed, of course, lawyers have been rushing into the vacuum to sue liquor manufacturers.
It's what we do best, Jason.
That's right.
We fill a void. We don't like to make things. We like to cut up the pie after it's made.
That's right. They've been suing about the most picayune, tiny little violations of labeling laws and everything else. And lawyers come in, especially in the United States, where lawyers reign supreme, and suing liquor manufacturers for the tiny little violations of these labeling laws.
Jason, picayune to you is a gross injustice and a fraud on the consumer to others.
That's right. So this now impacts a ton of celebrities, of course, who are flooding the alcohol industry.
It's like you said, look, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they run where the money is. So celebrities have gone on to make their own liquors. There's a laundry list of them. I'll give you some of my favorites. George Clooney with Casamigos tequila, 50 Cent with Effin' vodka, Puff Daddy with Ciroc vodka. The vodka wars we cover a lot here.
Yeah.
You got Dan Aykroyd does Crystal Head vodka, certain Crystal Head. Sammy Hagar, one of my favorites, some Van Halen fans out there. Cabo Wabo tequila. Ludacris does Conjure cognac. Marilyn Manson does something called Manson, which I thought was amazing.
Absinthe made
by Marilyn Manson. Danny DeVito limoncello. What else is Danny DeVito going to do? Justin Timberlake is in the tequila game too with 901 Silver. Donald Trump.
Oh, no kidding.
Prospective candidate for the presidency. Trump Super Premium.
I wonder
vodka.
where he makes it.
Did you have any guess as to what the name would be though?
Trump.
And Vince Neil, Trace Rios tequila. But my favorite, Jason, it's not a liquor.
Yep.
My favorite one of all is Hansen got in the game. Beer and wine I'll include here. They came out with something called Hop IPA, which is one of the best names you can come up with. It needed to be made.
Well, it needed to be made. And Hansen, much like their career, I'm sure the liquor fizzled out.
I don't know anyone who drinks hops, but I want to get some.
So we talked about the legal regime, lawyers flooding into this area. Ton of lawsuits that come out of it?
Yeah, there's a rash of them. There's basically a cottage industry that's bubbled up, particularly with this one firm in the last couple of years has been suing a bunch of major liquor makers. We got Maker's Mark, Tito's Vodka, Jim Beam, Bullet Bourbon, which you see at Trader Joe's. They've been sued for false advertising, basically. What they're putting on their labels are things like handcrafted in particular.
Right.
Tito's Vodka is known as handcrafted vodka. And these lawsuits have been filed and said, this stuff isn't handcrafted. This is manufactured in some by some faceless corporation, and it's not really made by an artisan. It's made in a process with machines. So they're suing over this.
This kind of thing drives me insane. It's not just in the alcohol industry; it's in every industry. So what's going to happen in this situation? I'm assuming it's happened here too.
Yeah.
Some lawyer got the idea this was not handcrafted, filed a putative class action. Basically, I have one person who says they bought this liquor
and
based on the fact that they thought it was handcrafted, which of course is nonsense. They bought it thinking that, and then they found out it wasn't, and therefore they lost the value of it. And we're not just suing on behalf of this person; we're suing on behalf of all 25 million people who have bought. This was Tito's, you mentioned.
Yeah.
That
Maker's
have bought
Mark,
Tito's, and therefore we want money. And of course, I get 40% of all the proceeds. I want every penny they've ever made in the sale of this liquor over whatever period of time.
Now, how do they prove up the damages in this type of lawsuit? So Maker's Mark actually had one of these thrown out because the judge said, look, 9 million bottles of bourbon are sold by Maker's Mark. Obviously, they're not all crafted by hand in the literal sense of it, so he threw it out. But even not getting to that legal argument, how would you prove up damages? Are you when you don't get a handcrafted something that actually wasn't handcrafted? What do you say?
I guess you could
say
that Tito costs X number of dollars a barrel, and if your typical non-handcrafted tequila or vodka in Tito's case would be X minus one half the value, and therefore everybody's entitled to half the money that they spent on this vodka back.
Yeah, and I guess they could try to prove that up. It certainly becomes expensive for the liquor companies to defend themselves, so maybe you get a nuisance value settlement out of this.
That's not nuisance value. When you mislabel something, I can imagine these are. We don't know, but it could be in the millions of dollars for sure.
The Bullet Bourbon one was actually a little bit different. It's interesting. Kentucky is big into its bourbon, right,
yeah.
Jason? They really care. That sweet Kentucky brown. Yeah, I mean, that is something that is so identified with the state. And they actually said on their label that they were distilled in their own Kentucky distillery. They wanted to sort of have the image that we have this nice distillery that we produce our product in. And in actuality, the distillery they used was for the Four Roses distillery, which is another bourbon brand.
Yeah.
And they sued over this. I thought that type of lawsuit, and that was filed in 2015, is maybe a little more meritorious than the handcrafted. What do you think of that type of lawsuit where they're actually promoting their own brand and their own distillery, but they're getting it from a different facility?
On the one hand, I think nobody actually buys liquor based on statements like handcrafted or made on this facility. But on the other hand, the liquor companies are putting those claims on the label for a reason. They're trying to create, we're going to talk about more about branding later on, but they're trying to create a brand in a very specific way by including these words, these phrases, these sort of artful terms.
Right.
You see it in other contexts, an artisan, and things like this. And you're doing that to create sort of an image that it's a little bit higher end than a cheaper version would be, even though it's sort of bogus when it comes to flavor and taste.
Yeah, I mean, the branding matters, right? I mean, they always come with these images on the bottle, right, of like a bucolic scene with horses galloping and wooden fences. They're conjuring something because branding matters a lot in alcohol, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they do taste different, I'm sure, but you really care about the image you're presenting.
As you know, Derek,
you're selling a lifestyle.
My favorite sort of liquor in the world is bourbon and whiskeys and things like that. It's basically all I drink. Now, I love wine if I'm out to dinner with my wife, but really all I love is the brown liquors. It's what I drink.
I got you some for a gift,
Oh,
Jason.
that's right.
I got
Derek. There's two things I love more than anything. One is bourbon, and the other is France.
French culture. Jason is steeped in it. He's a real Francophile.
And Derek bought me very generously. It was a Bastille bourbon, straight from France. Bastille being, of course, the famous prison in France. And Bastille bourbon, and I love this sentiment. It's one of my favorite gifts I've ever gotten. But we tried it,
and it tasted like turpentine.
It
tasted like you should remove paint from walls.
You're insulting the taste of turpentine.
How
right
dare
now.
you?
Right.
Turpentine will give you a good buzz.
But I do generally love whiskey, and I got to tell you, there's no greater confusion in the alcohol industry than between different types of whiskeys. Right? You have whiskey and bourbon and rye and American whiskey and Scotch whiskey and Japanese whiskeys are now coming in, and I get tons of questions because I drink a little bit of whiskey. I get tons of questions like, what is the difference? And I always struggle to find the answer.
I stumble. I can't figure it out.
So what we did is we brought in somebody who knows a ton about this and is going to educate me, and I think probably has some important sort of factoids that the audience might be interested in too.
I'm excited to meet him.
So Derek, very excited to have on the line. We have Jeff Arnett. Jeff is the master distiller for Jack Daniel's. Pretty cool.
Wow, he's the king of the distillery.
He's the king.
I love that.
He's been in the job since 2008. And Jeff, I think what you have must be the greatest job in the world. And the only piece of evidence I have for that is that you are, from what I read, the 7th master distiller in the 150 or so year history of Jack Daniel's. Is that right?
That is true. That's a time span that there have been 28 U.S. presidents and 12 popes, but there have only been 7 whiskey makers at Jack Daniel's. So I felt pretty fortunate, especially to be the 7th. Our best-known brand being Old Number 7, our Tennessee whiskey. So that's a number of significance here, and it's certainly been a lucky number for me.
Oh, you know what else is number 7? Andrew Jackson, 7th president of the United States from Tennessee.
That is
Yes,
true. It's unbelievable. We took 50 years to get through 7 presidents. The proof's in the pudding. This is the best job available because you just stick around. You're the 6th person after Jack himself.
That's
correct.
That's
wow,
right.
Unbelievable.
So, Jeff, I'm a huge bourbon guy, a huge whiskey guy, and a question that I get all the time, and I've never really had a terrific answer for it. I've sort of read it on Wikipedia 4 or 5 times, and I think that I know what I'm talking about, but I've gathered I actually don't. Is we use terms like whiskey and bourbon and rye, and we all know that they're sort of these distilled grain alcohols, but what is the difference as we use them in common vernacular between those?
Right. Whiskey is sort of the common category name for a lot of different products. So bourbon, scotch, rye are all forms of whiskey. Whiskey can be made in any country, and to be called a whiskey, it just means that you need to take a grain and ferment it, and then distill it, and then mature it in a barrel. So that's the basic definition that kind of binds all the different types of whiskeys together into the same class. But of course, if you're bourbon, you can't just be made anywhere. It's a product of the U.S. the same way Scotch is a product of Scotland.
Got it.
It has to be 51% corn. If for rye whiskey, you have to be 51% rye at least.
That makes sense.
So it kind of speaks to your grain bill. But one of the biggest differences, though, of American whiskeys and the rest of the whiskeys of the world is that we tend to use new barrels in America and rely on those for all of our color and well over half of our flavor. And that's not necessarily so when you look at Japanese whiskeys or Scotch, where they might smoke or peat or use some other form of flavor introduction.
Now, I'm certainly familiar, and I think most people are, about of peaty whiskeys. We're familiar with that. It comes out as to me, it's a smoky flavor. What are the other sort of?
What notes do you try to hit?
That's
I mean,
right.
so I drink and I try to sound a little sophisticated. Like I like to say the word caramel notes.
Yeah.
Is that sound good? Is that a way to impress people when you're drinking a nice bourbon?
I try not to get overly crazy with my descriptors of whiskey because I don't want it to be pretentious. Because I feel like a lot of wines have gotten complicated and so many rules for what pairs with what that a lot of people get intimidated by it and will just choose not to order it for fear of looking foolish. So, but absolutely. And when it comes to Jack Daniel's whiskey in particular, vanilla, caramel, butterscotch, we tend to be sweet to oaky in our character.
I like
so
that.
that would definitely be, if I hear someone say caramel to me, I would definitely absolutely agree. If it's a Jack Daniel's whiskey, but not necessarily of all whiskeys, of
It's
course.
funny, you don't know me very well, but you've pegged me perfectly as insufferably pretentious. So what you're giving as prescriptions not to be pretentious, you can rest assured I will use them pretentiously.
Now, I saw somewhere that although Jack Daniel's is referred to as an American whiskey, a Tennessee whiskey, that it technically meets the definition of bourbon. Is that right?
It does. To be a bourbon, you have to be 51% corn. Of course, made in the United States is the first prerequisite, but at least 51% corn, distilled below 160 proof, and then matured in a new charred oak barrel. So that's the basic definition of bourbon, and Jack Daniel's satisfies all of those things. So there's no exceptions if you look at it. We just do the additional step of charcoal mellowing that makes us Tennessee whiskey has historically been like a charcoal mellowed bourbon from the state of Tennessee.
Wow,
That's
you answered my question because I kept reading about sugar maple charcoal, and that's to mellow the flavor out, sort of round it out a little bit.
Well, if you look at historical documents about bourbon, the whole intent of putting it in a barrel was that the barrel would soften its bitter edge. Even though corn provides a lot of sweetness to the whiskey, it tends to cover its own sweetness up with a lot of bitter character when you ferment it and distill it. So the barrel is designed to kind of somewhat take the edge off and soften those bitter notes, and of course, gain complexity. And in the case of like Jack Daniel's, we make our own barrels. We're the only ones in the industry to do that. But that's a huge part of what people know of our product.
Right.
They can taste our distillate right off the still, and I think it would not necessarily have all the things that they would think are the characteristic flavors of Jack Daniel's, because the barrel is kind of that missing piece, and so we are going to the extra effort to buy our wood and season it, and we have stave mills and 2 cooperages that make all of our barrels for us.
So sort of part and parcel of that, we've seen a ton of celebrities get recently into the world of wine, tequila, vodka is the big new thing. But we don't hear very much of that with regard to whiskey at all, and it's always been my prejudice, my bias in favor of whiskey, that it's because it's more a more complex, difficult, historical sort of methodology or method for creating the
They don't need a cheap celebrity
flavors.
endorsement, maybe, Jason.
So
You don't need 50 Cent drinking it.
First of all, am I wrong? Are there celebs out there who are creating their own sort of whiskey labels? And if not, why not?
I think I can only speculate, why they choose not to get in the whiskey business. But I would tell you, I think a lot of people might avoid getting into the whiskey business simply because it takes a long time. It's not something that you're going to be able to, distill it and bottle it in the same day or even in the same season. Whiskey takes years. We're fortunate that we have, a couple of million barrels maturing in the hills here in Lynchburg, Tennessee. And so we have a mature queue of barrels that are kind of ready to fill bottles. But, for a lot of people, if they're looking at a business venture, that's kind of a little bit of
some lag time.
Certainly a barrier to entry, if you will, that you have to wait years to mature the whiskey to get something in a bottle that you'd be proud to put your name on. So that may be, the big part of it. But, of course, you are seeing more celebrity endorsements come into the whiskey brands, not necessarily ownership.
I would think that by now some Silicon Valley billionaire would have come along to Jack Daniels or a smaller distiller and said, hey, how much can I buy those barrels from you for? But
and how wonderful do those hills sound where they just have distilling whiskey? If you
You
stumble upon those hills,
we're pretty fortunate, though, that we largely have been doing things the same way here for 150 years. Some of the technologies have improved, but the basics of whiskey making here at Jack Daniels today are not that different than they were 150 years ago when he first set up shop here.
Interesting.
But the one thing that you have to have when it comes to whiskey is the patience and the time to mature it right. It gains all of its color and well over half of its flavor in the time in the barrel, so you don't ever want to shorten that because it's just too big a part of the process. But, if you're a vodka, you can literally distill it and bottle it in the same day and have it on the shelf. So, that immediate proposition. For a lot of people, their celebrity may be, something that's here today and gone tomorrow. So,
right.
The ability to get your name on it and get it on the shelf tomorrow probably sounds like a less risky venture for them.
Got it. So I had a question about the Japanese whiskeys that you brought up earlier. Sort of, what is the feeling out there in the industry? It's such a distinctly American product to me. Whiskey, I think of as being made in Tennessee or Kentucky for bourbon. And what's the feeling out there in the market? Are they respected? There's a lot of big brands out there. They're making a push. What's your thoughts on that?
I would liken, I find most of the Japanese whiskeys to be very similar to Scotch. They can't call themselves Scotch because they're not made in Scotland, but if you look at the processes that they follow, their grains, using pot stills, going in used barrels, maybe having some smoky elements added in through the malting process as well. I find them to be pretty similar to Scotch, but there's a little bit of a whiskey renaissance going on right now.
Yep.
And people are out exploring and looking around. More people drinking whiskey than probably have ever been drinking whiskey, which, of course, we assume is going to be good news for brands like Jack Daniels, who have been around a long time for a reason.
Yep.
Because we feel like we make great products. But, it's a time that we certainly are coming out with new products here. We've utilized, the fact that we make our own barrels to kind of create different character products, and just did one to celebrate our 150th anniversary. We've come out with our first new grain build, being a rye whiskey.
Nice.
And we're seeing that, bourbon wasn't always the king of American whiskey. It kind of emerged after Prohibition, but prior to Prohibition, most American whiskey that was consumed was rye whiskey.
Oh, no kidding.
So that's kind of, you're seeing that. I think that's benefiting Irish whiskey. It's benefiting Japanese whiskey right now.
Yep.
If there's one area that hasn't done as well in this whiskey renaissance, it's the Scotch industry. The last few years have been a little bit hard on it.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And I think largely because, if there is an Achilles heel for Scotch whiskey, it's their lack of mixability. For a lot of people, they're going to get introduced to whiskeys through cocktails.
Yeah, Jack and Coke.
And you don't see Scotches being poured in sours or Manhattans or Old Fashions and things of that nature. And it's that cocktail culture that's kind of driving a lot of the interest around whiskey today, I think.
Well, speaking of that, you have a whiskey party. If I'm throwing a whiskey party, what is the sort of ultimate first, what's the ultimate whiskey cocktail, and what's the ultimate food pairing with whiskey?
You know, for me, I actually like a very simple old-fashioned, just, you know, like a brown sugar cube and an orange peel where you just zest the glass and just kind of bruise that in the bottom, but just ice and some of our Jack Daniel's single barrel.
Yep.
So it's maybe slightly sweeter and has a little bit of a citrus ring to it, but it really lets the whiskey shine and serve as the predominant character of the drink. But you know, if I'm going to be serving something, if I'm going to do hors d'oeuvres, of course, the classic things that go well with whiskey are usually going to be chocolate or cheese. Both of those, you know, and the different types of chocolate, whether you use milk chocolate or dark chocolate, of course, can kind of play off of the variations of whiskey that you serve. Cheeses as well. You can get smoked cheeses. That tend to do pretty well, especially with a sweeter whiskey like Jack Daniel's.
Jason, how am I going to go back to work now?
I don't know if you were aware of it, but when you started mentioning brown sugar and brown sugar cubes, your southern accent just even went a little bit deeper south. When you started, you just sort of went into.
Well, I'm a native Tennessean, so I get it honest.
You went into yourself right there.
It was beautiful. I felt like I was on a porch with like just swinging on the swing, just looking at a field and drinking an old fashioned. I was there, man.
Jeff Arnett, we can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast. And next time you're in Southern California, give us a ring. We'll come on in and we'll do a little whiskey tasting
but
together.
Really, don't come empty-handed, Jeff. I mean, you can't be the master distiller and come in here
empty-handed. I've learned that, and it's great to have a job that you don't mind taking some of your work home every now and then.
That's
best job in the world, as a matter of fact. All right, Jeff. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Jeff.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Man, I absolutely love that. That guy was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Just the knowledge of whiskey, I love it.
It was incredible.
Thank you for indulging me on that.
Yeah, well, now it's time to indulge me.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I know you love the brown liquors, but I love the nerdy stuff. So I want to pivot a little bit here, and I want to talk about vodka.
All right.
Totally different liquor. We're moving over to the clears, okay?
Right.
No caramel notes here. Vodka branding. There's a famous study done at Harvard Business School. It's been replicated in other places that you actually can't distinguish between the tastes of different vodkas, and that the only thing that matters is branding and bottling.
Wait. So the Grey Gooses and the high-end ones are no different than the Smirnoffs and Pop-Offs and that sort of thing?
Same, Jason.
Derek,
You've been chumped. You have been chumped. You've been buying
not
girls'
just me.
fancy drinks, Belvedere and soda. Just go with Well vodka all the way. Save your shekels. They don't know the difference. They can't tell. So this study is actually very interesting. They did what's called a triangle experiment, where they set out 3 cups in front of someone, and they said there's 2 of them are filled with a cheap off-brand plastic bottle type vodka. 1 is filled with a very high-end top shelf vodka, and they put it in front of people, and they said, just tell us which is which. Just tell us which is the expensive vodka.
And the experiment, the study found that nobody could really tell the difference?
Over and over again, it came out a third for A, a third for B, and a third for C.
Wow.
So people just did not know. Now, they tried to front, this one has a smooth flavor, this one makes me...
I can't buy it. I can't buy it.
It's unbelievable, but I can prove it to you.
All right.
I brought in 2 of TMZ's finest to conduct this experiment. We've got Courtney Doucette on the right, our lovable liquor-loving Courtney.
I love it.
We've also got a little special treat. We've got Casey Carver, who's our publicist, also liquor-loving.
Now, I will say, I disagree with what you think the conclusion of this thing's going to be, but you have brought the right 2 people. I suggest that nobody has downed as much vodka as these 2. Maybe in the history of the world.
I'm wondering
That's quite possible.
what Courtney's breath smells like right now. I think before we do this
do we have a
experiment...
baseline set up?
We drink a lot, but we don't remember. It's going to be hard.
So here's the experiment, guys.
Wait, do we have a baseline
let's
set
do
up?
this.
For Courtney?
Yeah, I don't know.
I always remember after I drink.
We're
so.
also going to do a field sobriety test after this, or before.
Do we get to
if
keep the
need
bottles?
I'm good at those. I do them all the time.
So you do the whole nose thing? All right.
All right,
So here's what we're going to do, guys. You have in front of you 3 cups. They're labeled A, B, and C.
Okay.
Yeah.
2 of those cups, you each have your own set. 2 of those cups contain a cheap off-brand vodka, the kind of stuff you get in plastic bottles. So you know the type. I'm not going to tell you.
But it's
vodka.
widely available in every supermarket.
Widely available,
It's the
but
bottom
inexpensive.
shelf.
It's
It's in my
bottom
house
shelf
right
type
now.
of stuff. It's stuff you throw at a frat party and mixing
It's so
drinks.
bottom shelf that the bottom shelf is like, hey, we're not associated with that.
And why is it on the bottom shelf? It's in a plastic bottle anyway, so it could survive a fall. It's that kind of
Okay,
vodka.
all right.
Bottom shelf.
Okay.
One of the cups contains a very high-end glass bottle, the stuff you chill and drink neat.
So we're not going to use labels, but you all know these brands very well. The top end is what you consider to be very top end liquor, that's vodka that's commonly available. The bottom end is what you'd expect to have cheap. You know, you mix it with cocktails typically, that kind of thing.
Now,
What
I
I
think that guys are a bunch of chumps who buy girls expensive drinks at bars, especially
Shocking you
mixed
think
drinks.
this.
I know.
So I have this
How many
contention.
drinks have you honestly bought for real?
I don't buy too many.
So it's not your contention, though.
Yeah, so, and I think this actually been borne out. I don't think you can determine which is the expensive vodka and which is the cheap vodka. So we set up an experiment. Two have cheap vodka in them, the same cheap vodka, and one has expensive vodka. We're going to do a little taste test.
Let's do this in turns. Who wants to go first?
I'm nervous. You go.
Okay, I'll go
Casey's
first.
going first.
Now, do you guys, you're vodka drinkers?
Yes.
Do you think you might be able to pull this off?
I think I can.
I think I can. I can't say, but I'm a big, certain brand drinking.
Do you go to a bar and order the Belvederes and the Grey Gooses and things like
and
that?
the Tito's, Grey Gooses.
Okay.
When I
Oh,
order.
I think Courtney's more of a pop-off.
I don't order my own drinks.
Or if I'm buying, I buy that. I don't think I've bought
All right,
off for a while.
You both are pretty, brag a lot about your drinking prowess.
But
so
again,
here we
I
go.
It's the
might
only thing I
just
have going
be.
for me.
All right.
Once down, they all taste the
You
same.
know.
Case, you can drink them in any order you want, but
I'm
you're
just
to
gonna
tell
go
me.
in ABC.
And there's water in front of you as well to clear your palate between drinks.
Oh, she's doing the nose
Oh,
test
that's
first.
studious of you to go ABC.
she's
Don't you only do that with wine? You sniff it.
She's doing whiny. Now, the temperature's chilled. These are all chilled to perfection.
I mean, chilled. Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right, A down the hatch. A little sip of water to clear the palate.
Here she goes with B. Sniffing.
Oh, I like her
I know, why does
technique.
she
Do you like the
sniff?
technique, Jay?
Drinking. This is great
She's
for a
treating it like
podcast.
fine wine.
Could you
I
go
know it's
slower,
great for it's
Case?
very.
I don't have a technique.
Yeah, really
right.
drag this out,
Okay.
Casey. We've got a long time.
Hey, I'm gonna take my time. This
And
is serious
now
business.
Casey is picking up glass 3, a
Oh,
C,
yeah.
and drinking from
she's
that.
3.5 sheets to the wind.
Do we have the same answer? For
No,
the
you do
cup?
not. You have different
No.
answers.
Okay, cheap, expensive.
All right.
Okay, so she says B
All right, let's not
is the
reveal.
expensive. We're not going to reveal it yet.
do
All right.
it.
Courtney,
do
do
the
the
same
Courtney's
thing.
now A.
Oh, she's shooting it.
Oh, I didn't drink it all.
Drink
That-
some water between
I've
shots.
had that last week.
Drink some
and
water
that-
between shots.
Oh, really?
Clear your palate.
You got to
Why?
clear the palate so that, it's science, Courtney. This
All right.
is not just to give
So,
you shots.
I thought it was
Courtney just
different.
shot glass A. She
Yeah, I
just
didn't take them
shot
all.
Glass
Should
B.
I?
I love that Casey sipped and Courtney is just down.
Ew.
I mean, I'm gonna go back
All
and
right, she
finish
says-
them now.
She says B is ill.
Okay, ill for B.
That was rough. Or hard.
And
there's C.
C.
I think C.
Ours
All right,
was
so
a good one.
Courtney says C.
Well, I had to finish mine. Hold on.
And
Casey says B.
And
The
now
actual
We're going to
answers.
go to Parker.
Let's go to Parker for the answers.
So, Casey, your expensive brand is actually Cup A,
Wow, that was my least favorite.
and Courtney actually managed to get it right.
The liquor expert of TMZ!
There you go, Courtney.
Guys, my first test, I got an A on.
So what was this one?
Now I want to do a little.
What was this one?
It's
You
the
can't
cheap-
say,
the-
right?
The off-brand, the cheaper brand.
That's nuts, because that A was not as good.
Now, let me ask you a question, though, because this is a very impressive study that said that you're not able to determine all that matters is the branding of the vodka.
Yeah.
Did you guess a little bit, Courtney?
No,
Were
I
they
didn't
closer
guess.
than you expected, or were
No,
you
I
confident
knew.
it was C?
I know. I knew
If-
from each of those I tasted.
If I were to do it 10 times
I
and
could
get
do
you
it.
just hammered,
Nailing
you
it.
think you would nail it?
Always.
And
I kind of believe her. I think she's got a long track
we
record.
need to wrap up, but we would love to let Courtney know that she has won the leftover vodka.
Yeah, so can we bring it out for her?
4th of July. Can I get them now? Where are they?
No.
All right, guys, thanks very much for
Thanks,
tuning in,
everyone.
and we will see you next week. Thanks a whole lot.
Take care.
Thanks for watching. If you want more nerdy deep dives into the legal side of celebrity news, hit our subscribe button right here.
And check out our previous episodes over here.